Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at First Chronicles chapters 1 through 10 in our continuing study of the historical books of the Old Testament. First of all, the title of the book, we call it Chronicles. We divide it into first and second. Those are later innovations. The Hebrew title is Divrei Hayomim. Hayomim is the, and a yom is a day. So these are words of the days. And that actually sounds a little bit like what you imagine the word chronicles might be. Words of the days. The Greek title is para la memon, menon, I'm sorry. Para is something that's alongside of. So these are things left to the side. And in that regard, that Greek title sees this as a addendum to the books of First and Second Kings. These are things that weren't mentioned in First and Second Kings, although actually there's quite a bit of repetition. But some additional, like an appendix of footnotes that have been added. Now, if we just look at the material in First and Second Chronicles, notice I go from Adam to David. Well, that's the genealogical section, and so we start off with the genealogies, which are going to cover all the material from Genesis through First Samuel, but not anything in the way of detail, or I should say, not very much in the way of detail. Very little detail, but mostly just genealogies of all of the peoples that lived in those periods. And then we have the material. Notice I put Second Samuel. It actually begins with the death of Saul, but the material of Second Samuel that's found in the reign of King David, that's going to be the rest of First Chronicles. So as we start Second Chronicles, we're going to see now Solomon's story, which is going to be covered in First and Second Kings, from the reign of Solomon all the way to where we have Judah alone. So notice we start off with the death of Saul, which actually is in First Samuel right at the end. And Israel is united, and then that takes us through the reign of King Solomon. Again, Israel is united under from the death of Saul. Uh, Throughout the reign of David. Now we're going to go back and talk about some things that are missing. Remember, um, Ishbosheth is in that period, but he's not going to be mentioned here. And then I have the kingdom divided after the death of Solomon in the days of Rehoboam. And so now I have Israel and Judah being two different kingdoms. And then I have the fall of Samaria, where Judah now enters that period by itself. And so I have Judah alone, culminating in the fall of Jerusalem. However, Chronicles is going to have a few more verses after that, where the kingdom of Judah or the people of Judah or the Jews come back into the land after the Babylonian captivity. So that's something that wasn't given to us at the end of Second Kings. Second Kings just ends with the fall of Jerusalem. This will end a little bit after that. Now, Kings then focuses on what we can think of as the prophetic and political perspective, whereas Chronicles will focus on the priestly perspective. If you can't see it from the temple, it probably won't be covered in Chronicles. It's what happens in and around the temple, but it's with the kings, but what they did having to do with the temple. So Kings gives us, it relates the historical facts with very little commentary. It's just going to give you the facts, nothing but the facts. A little like the way that Matthew, Mark, and Luke cover the life of Christ. The Synoptic Gospels just tell you the story of Jesus. When you get to John, the Gospel of John gives you a lot of the commentary on that. Chronicles does the same way, same thing, not with Jesus, but with the books of the history of the kings. It tells you the meaning behind the facts, gives you a lot of not just interpretation, but explanation of why things happened. Now, in Kings, the storyline is going to go back and forth once we get to the division of the kingdom. Now, we're not going to see that here in this lecture today because we're not yet into Second Chronicles. But once you get into Second Chronicles, the storyline is going to go back and forth between the northern and southern kingdom of Judah. That's in Kings. Chronicles, even though it's covering the same period, you don't have that because the perspective is primarily on the temple and on the kings of Judah. You only deal with the kings of Israel when they're down in the territory of Judah, when they're dealing with the kings of Judah. Other than that, they're absent from the story. Now, the recipients of the book are those who have returned from exile, because remember, the book isn't completed until after the Babylonian exile. So now they're back and they're looking back. Wow, what a story we've had. So the purpose of the Book of Chronicles, first of all, to set forth a record of the priestly worship of God's people from David to the exile and just beyond, because at the end, they've come back from exile, but you don't get any details. It is Ezra that will pick up that story now that they're coming back. It will give the fulfillment of the promises of the Mosaic Law regarding faithfulness and unfaithfulness to the covenant, where God had said, if you obey me, I'm going to bless you. And we're going to see all those times where the people of Judah, starting off with Israel before there was a separate kingdom of Judah, where both Israel and Judah were blessed as they're obeying God, but also as they're cursed when they're unfaithful to the covenant and unfaithful to the Lord. Finally, it's going to show the importance of the scriptures in providing the rule of faith for God's people, because they're going to be reading the scriptures in the scriptural book. They're going to be looking at those times where they followed the scriptures and they obeyed them and everything went well. So we start off chapters 1 through 9, as we said, the genealogies of Israel. This is just a genealogy section. And here we go. Adam, Seth, Enosh. This is like returning to Genesis chapter 5, just hearing the list of names. Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch. Remember him, the one who walked with God. Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we're not going to go through all the names, but we just start off on a journey through the names as they are listed for us, taking us all the way back to creation and Adam. It's a beginning that's very similar to the beginning of the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, the genealogies of Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham, the son of David. Now, we haven't gotten to Abraham yet, but that's all given for the same reason, is to link not just Jesus, but the people of Israel back to their roots, back to their beginnings. And you say, well, that's the beginning of everyone. Yes, it is. But the focus isn't on everyone. The focus will quickly turn to the people of Israel. And so we're taken back on that journey. Remember how you had Japheth and you had Ham and you had Shem, and Japheth was largely settled in the people that we think of as Indo-European. And Ham, notice I've got Africa, but also a little bit of the Middle East as well, especially with the Phoenicians and Canaan. And I've got Shem, the Semitic people, for the most part, were there confined to the Middle East, although there's some overlap. The sons of Japheth are mentioned now. And we have Gomer, who, according to Josephus, settled in sort of central northern Europe. We had Magog. Josephus describes them as the people, the Scythians, who settled to the north of the Black Sea, the area that we think of as the Ukraine today. Madai, the Medes, Yavin was just their term for the Greeks, but it wasn't just the Greeks. It was also people who went to Italy and even Spain. One big happy, I know about a happy family. If you ask the Romans back in their day, where did they come from? They would have said, well, we come from the east. Now, they would have said not Javan, not Greeks, but they would have said Troy, which is just across the water from where Greece was. Next, we look at the sons of Ham, and they are described as Cush, which is way down to the south of Egypt. You have Mitzrayim, which was their term for Egypt. You also have Put, which corresponds to Libya, and and Canaan from the land of Canaan. Finally, you have the sons of Shem. Elam is mentioned. The Elamites were to the east of southern Mesopotamia as you go to the mountains to the east. Asher was their term for Assyria. Notice Arphaxad is mentioned, from which you get both the Israelites as well as the Arabs, descendants of Abraham. Lud settles over in western Anatolia. And finally, Aram, the Arameans. Aram was what we call Syria today. That's a later designation Aram, and you're going to have their language Aramaic, which is actually going to be centrally located. So it's not that they were a big country, but their language really made the rounds, and Aramaic becomes eventually one of the common languages of that part of the world. Now, First Chronicles chapters 1 through 9 then starts off with these are genealogies, Adam to Abraham and to his sons. And as we get to chapter 2, it's now the sons of Israel, all the way down to David. And then chapter 3 is the sons of David and Solomon. And so what we have there is the lineage of David. We keep going to chapter 4. It's now the sons of Judah and Simeon. Here we have an interesting pause to what's called the Prayer of Jabez. Somebody, I think it was Dave Wilkerson, wrote a book a number of years ago on this little prayer. First Chronicles chapters 4, 9 through 10, verses 9 through 10, where Jabez, we read, was more honorable than his brothers, and his mother named him Jabez, saying, "Because I bore him with pain." And you have to hear um, this, it's almost not quite a rhyme. That's saying it too strongly. The term Jabez, or they would say Yabez, or Yabetz, it's got ets in the end. There's a different letter for Z, but Yabetz. And then the word for pain in the Hebrew here is atsev, or otsev, I'm sorry, otsev. And you say, well, that doesn't really sound a lot. It's got the same letters, but they're arranged a little bit differently. So it's not the same word, but it's enough alike to have a little bit of similarity, almost like a play on words. Um, Notice, because I bore him with pain, I guess he had some hard childbirth, or maybe hard to bring up. I'm not sure which it was. Verse 10, now Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm." Now, harm is a different word there. You're going to have that it might not pain me. That's our old friend Utsev. Um, but the term harm there is the Hebrew term ra'ah, evil. And as Wilkerson talked about, he suggested that people pray the prayer of Jabez. And I think, well, that's okay. I think you could actually pray most, if not all, of the prayers of the Bible. Someone might have a little bit of a hesitancy too, but for the most part, I think we can pray our way through the Bible. In fact, my friend Dr. Norm Wise suggests we do exactly that. Just pray through not just the prayers, but just through the entire Bible, Genesis 1, and pray about that, and Genesis 2, and pray about that. And I think he's onto something. So yes, I think we can pray this. Although it strikes me that when Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he didn't tell them to pray the prayer of Jabez. He gave them the Lord's Prayer. But as I compare this prayer with the Lord's Prayer, there are certain similarities, asking God to bless you, and enlarge your border. Now, maybe you don't want your border enlarged, so I'm not so sure about that, but asking God to bless you, that's okay. And that he be with you, asking that your hand might be on him. It strikes me that when we pray, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I always add, when I'm praying that part of the Lord's Prayer, I always add, and Lord, you can start with me, please. Uh, but notice that you would keep me from harm. The word ra'ah is actually evil. So that really sort of corresponds, and deliver us from evil, or as Jesus said in the Greek text of Matthew, deliver us from the evil one. Now, this doesn't have from the harmful one. That might be, if I tried to make that literal, I would have to note that ra'ah is actually, yes, it is singular, but it's singular feminine. So the evil one, uh, the evil gal, but I don't think we have to do that. I don't think that's actually in view here. Um, that it might not pain me. So I think there might be a bit of overlap in this prayer with the Lord's Prayer, especially if you look and dig a little bit. And the good news is that God granted him what he requested, and so God did bless him. God did keep him from evil, that it wouldn't hurt him, which his name sounded a little bit like that word hurt, and it's not the same word, so don't be too exact if you're treating with this passage. But it's an interesting sidelight in prayer as we go through what have so far just been a list of genealogies, a list of people. A little bit further, just a few verses further, we come to the sons of Ezra, who were Ether, Mered, Epher, and Yalon. And now we have a footnote added that these are the sons of Bithiah, the daughter of Pharaoh, whom Mered took. And she conceived and bore Miriam, and you have a number of different people, Shammai and Ishba, the father of Ishtemoa. His Jewish father bore Jared, the father of Gedor, and Heber, the father of Soko, and Jekuthiel, the father of Janoah. But notice the part that I circled. These are the sons of Bithiah, the daughter of Pharaoh. Now that's interesting. The term Bithiah actually had Bath is the word for daughter, and then Bithiah, that Yah part at the end is short for Yahweh. Which, if I take that literally, it's daughter of Yahweh, but she was really the daughter of Pharaoh. Did you catch that? Now, this seems to be those people who maybe came out of Egypt, a connection there, and she's the daughter of Pharaoh, but she takes for herself a name. I don't think she necessarily had this name when she came out of the daughter of Pharaoh. I don't think the Pharaoh gave her the name. She instead identifies as the daughter of Yahweh, the daughter of the Lord. Um, and this reminds me of those who came out of the Exodus, and yet there were some who were from Egypt and said, we want to be with the God that did all these plagues. We want to be with that God. We're leaving Egypt and we're going to identify ourselves with them. And I think that's interesting. Now, a little footnote: when you get to the King James version and the Hebrew text, it's that same description actually goes down a verse and is down here in verse 18. The New American Standard translators felt that it was better understood being connected a bit earlier. That's why they put it in parentheses to try to explain where that. They're trying to be helpful, and I suppose they are. We continue with the genealogies. Next, we have the genealogies of the sons of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh. Those were the tribes that settled on the east side of the Jordan River. Remember, they crossed over to help with the taking of the rest of Canaan, but then they settled on the east side of the Jordan. Next, you have the sons of Levi. They're musicians and settlements because both Levites and priests are a big focus here in Chronicles. You have the sons of Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher. And finally, in chapter 8, you have the sons of Benjamin in greater detail because they were already mentioned in chapter 7. And finally, you have a summary of Jerusalem focusing on the priests and the Levites. You say, wait a minute, there's somebody missing. There's no mention of the tribe of Dan. Why is that? Well, remember, the tribe of Dan said, we don't like the inheritance that God gave us. They were uncomfortably close to the Philistines. And so they packed up and they left and they moved way up to the northern part of Canaan, almost off the map if you're looking at a map of Canaan, right near the Mount Hermon and the headwaters of the Jordan River. And that becomes a place where eventually they set up a temple. Remember how after the division of the northern and southern tribes, you have the northern tribes of the nation of Israel now, and it was Jeroboam, their first king after Solomon, who set up places of worship, one at Bethel and one at Dan. So this Dan becomes known as a place of pagan worship, of wrong worship. They weren't worshiping pagan gods, but they were worshiping in a wrong way, where they were worshiping the Lord using a golden calf. And so Chronicles doesn't even mention that. That tribe is sort of lost and forgotten because of its wrong way of worshiping. So we had genealogies of Israel, but now the death of Saul takes place in chapter 10 of Chronicles. So Saul died for his trespass, which he committed against the Lord, because of the word of the Lord, which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making an inquiry of it. Now, you know that story from the end of First Samuel, so we don't have to cover it again. It's just making a reference to that. And notice, and did not inquire of the Lord, therefore he killed him, that is, God killed him through the hands of the Philistines, and turned the kingdom to David, the son of Jesse. And then we read in chapter 11, verse 1, then all Israel gathered to David at Hebron and said, behold, we are your bone and your flesh. Now think about this. I go from chapter 10 to the death of Saul, right to the reign of David and his recognition by all the tribes. We go on, in times past, even when Saul was king, you were the one who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord your God said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel, and you shall be prince over my people Israel. So they all crown David as king. So all the elders of Israel come to the king at Hebron, and David made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel, according to the word of the Lord through Samuel. Did you catch that there's no mention of Ishbosheth and those 7 years where the northern tribes followed Ishbosheth, who had Abner as his chief of staff? That's not mentioned. We're just not going there. No mention of Ishbosheth and those 7 years. Indeed, there's no mention of Bathsheba and his adultery and murder of Uriah. There's no mention of the Absalom revolt. A lot of things just got passed over. It's not that there's a denial that they happened. We're just not talking about that. We're not remembering that. And this reminds me of the words of Isaiah, where Isaiah says, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind. And I think the same thing is echoed when we get to Revelation chapter 21, starting in verse 4, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death, and there will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne said, behold, I'm making all things new. Gone and for all intents and purposes, forgotten. Now, I don't know that if that means that you say, gee, I can't remember what happened, but we won't be living there anymore. There's coming a day when we're going to have happen in our lives what the Chronicles did. And yes, there was sin there, and there was division, and there were problems, but we're not living there anymore. So we're going to celebrate the salvation, the unity that we have from the Lord.